Should Catholics do yoga? What is the clear-cut and definitive answer to this issue? I have 5 important considerations that are helpful to discern the practice of yoga. There are many opinions floating out there today, but there is a way to know definitively when we examine what the Catholic Church teaches on this. If you haven't already, subscribe on YouTube and click the bell so that you're notified when I post new videos. Real quick, before we get into this, I'm gonna have a real honest moment with you here. I made a video on this a couple of years ago outlining what the Catholic Church teaches about yoga, and if you're interested, you can check that out if you want to. I'll be honest with you, that video kind of wrecked me. The vile disgust that I received from posting that video was so overwhelming. People who I thought were on a journey towards the fullness of truth, a journey towards holiness and the best way for us to live. And hearing the utter disgust from people who are claiming to be following the church's teaching on this just left me so saddened and so disheartened. To have that kind of a response from people who are claiming to live virtuously in the church's teachings that I actually had to take a break from making videos for a while. And it made me realize all the more that people need clarity on these tough issues. And that's what I intend to do in this video. Now, this should go without saying, but in our day and age, it has to be said. Just because I disagree with how other people choose to practice, just because I disagree with what other people believe and even teach, doesn't mean that I hate them. On the contrary, I love them, and that's why I put out these videos, because I love people so much so that I want for them to be living in the way of truth. Collectively, we should be coming together and stirring within one another a desire to want to align ourselves with the fullness of truth. All right. Enough said, here we go, yoga. Full disclosure, I am an athletic person. I love fitness, I love stretching, I even love poses. A little bit of a brag moment for me. This is a picture of me holding the single arm elbow lever, which I only started training when I was 35 years old because I decided that I didn't want to let any more of my life go by without me really trying to apply myself to something that I'm passionate about. And for me, it's a reminder that we are never too old to be able to give it our all, to learn something new, to better ourselves. But I will never step foot into a yoga class again, and here's why. Here's the first consideration. We need to know and understand what yoga is. Ancient or traditional yoga is a meditative discipline that comes from the Eastern spirituality practice of Hinduism. It uses a progression of physical postures to bring about spiritual enlightenment, but not through the God of Christianity, rather through one's own center or the energy of the universe. In North America, the practice of modern yoga has become popularized, and many people don't actually recognize the traditional roots of this practice. Many people claim to sterilize the spirituality from this practice, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Why is this a problem? What is the problem with ancient traditional yoga? The Catholic Church warns against yoga by name specifically, and other Eastern spiritual practices, by Cardinal Ratzinger in a document by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Yes, we can take some of these good elements from these practices. However, the document warns that people have a tendency of perceiving that a physical benefit, such as being more relaxed because of stretching, was actually brought about by a spiritual practice, not necessarily because of just natural means. And this is a real danger. Secondly, and most importantly, the practice and participation in traditional ancient yoga actually breaks the first commandment of God. You shall have no other gods besides me. So how is this the case? If we are attempting to bring about a spiritual enlightenment, but not through the God of Christianity, the one true God, but through either our own self or through the energy of the universe, then we are participating in self-divination or idolatry. And as I said, the goal of yoga as an ancient practice is as a form of worship. Even the word namaste literally means I bow to you. And it's a form of worship. This is a problem. The second consideration, what if it's just for exercise? So what if there was a way that we could use yoga just for the physical postures to engage in a fitness class and strip all of the spirituality from it? Well, let me give you an example. This is really analogous to the Catholic Mass. Perhaps someone were to invite you to this new fitness regime called the Mass, where you go and you participate in the Mass and its movements and its postures, the standing and the sitting and the kneeling, and you do this solely for physical activities, just for fitness, and you go with the intention of not participating in anything spiritual, but just to get the physical benefit from the postures and the movements. Someone might say, yeah, I go to the Mass, but just for exercise, not for anything spiritual. Here's the problem with that. The liturgy is a religious celebration. If you were to invite a non-Catholic to attend a Catholic Mass and they were to go in to receive communion, they are participating in a religious practice. They are participating in something that is spiritual, even if they're just going there to be there for a friend whose child is being baptized. Or maybe they are going there because they love the physical benefits that you get by participating in the Mass. Whatever reason, they're participating in a spiritual practice. And in fact, if they were to receive communion, it would actually be doing them harm spiritually. So when people say, well, I go to yoga classes, but I don't participate in the spiritual element, that might be the case. However, the yoga class itself is a spiritual practice. And by participating in that yoga class, you are participating, you are being drawn in to the religious, spiritual practice of this tradition. I have been in a yoga class before, and at the time I was unaware of these dangers. Though I didn't intend to participate in anything spiritual by being in this yoga class, my instructor obviously was. For her, it not only was a physical experience, but also a spiritual one. And by me participating in that spiritual experience, I was being drawn in to a religious practice as well. Consideration number 3, aren't all of these postures neutral? Yes. Now, in saying all of this about the practice of yoga, yoga does not own dominion over these postures. Like the postures themselves, our physical movements with our bodies, they are intrinsically neutral. We can either choose an intent to do good with them or to do evil with them, but the postures and the movements themselves are neutral. So when I bend over to touch my toes to stretch out my back, when I wake up in the morning or when I've been sitting at a desk all day long, I'm not participating in the spiritual practice of yoga by doing that. I'm just bending over and stretching my back. Because if this were the case, then even just by simply breathing, I would be participating in this Eastern spiritual practice, but I'm not. However, paired with our intentionality and association with yoga, brings us and draws us into a religious experience. Just like someone who attends a Catholic Mass, whether it's just for fitness and exercise, or whether you are there just to watch and observe the baptism, we are drawn into a religious experience by participation. Consideration number 4, what's wrong with just simply using the name yoga? So what if you were to take the good from yoga, the stretching, the breathing, the meditation, the relaxation, and you were to brand it as Christian yoga or Catholic yoga? What would be wrong with that? Well, here's the reason why that's not a good idea. It creates confusion and scandal. Like someone might think because the name yoga is associated with this particular practice, that they are participating in the Eastern spirituality of ancient and traditional yoga, which isn't something that is good and upheld by the Catholic Church. That's not something that we can do because it's gravely immoral, because it breaks the first commandment. Even modern day yoga does not necessarily sterilize the spiritual element from the practice. The reason it's not a good idea to use the name yoga also is because if it's Christian yoga and it's simply just meditation and stretching and breathing, that's not yoga. You're calling something that is something else. That makes sense. So call it something else, like Christian meditation or Christian stretching, whatever it is. But it's not yoga, and it's not going to lead people to think that it's okay to practice ancient and traditional yoga because of the name association. Think about it from this perspective. Let's say you're a Catholic and an atheist started a new fitness regime called the Mass. It would be offensive, right? Or at least it should be, because the Mass is a sacred religious practice and is not intended to be used that way. Similarly with yoga. In fact, there are many yogis who should be offended that modern day people want to sterilize the spirituality from their religious practice. Consideration number 5, intention is not the only factor. One last consideration for people who might still be on the fence as to whether yoga is a moral practice or not, even if the spirituality has been sterilized from it. If we swap out the practice of ancient traditional yoga with something like the Ouija board, we can quickly see the dangers. The Ouija board was created to be a medium of supernatural spirits. One might suggest that they want to use the Ouija board, but for entertainment purposes only, not believing in its demonic or spirit power. Regardless of our intentions, the participation in that act is objectively disordered, and it's designed for false worship. This has the possibility to lead to infestation, oppression, and endorsement of false religion. So whether we're participating in the practice of the Ouija board, or whether we are participating in the practices of Eastern spirituality contrary to our faith, or maybe even sterilized from spirituality is what we believe, intention is not the only factor. I would love to hear about your experience with the practice of yoga and how you might reconcile these teachings of Catholicism with the practice of Eastern spirituality today. Make sure you let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, click the bell to be notified when I post new videos. Lastly, I would love for you to consider supporting my ministry so that I can continue to create these faith resources for people who need it the most. When you become a patron, you get access to my music and talks and faith resources. You get all the details when you go to patreon.com/Chris Bray. Thanks so much, and God bless. Would you come and